Have you ever wondered how a normal flight turns into a plane crash in just a few seconds? In this video, you'll see real plane crash footage caught on camera and the chain of mistakes, failures, and conditions behind each accident. These are not just dramatic moments on video. They are real aviation case studies that show what went wrong, why it happened, and what every incident can teach us. On June 25, 2020, near Centerville, Utah, what began as an apparent emergency approach turned fatal in just a few seconds. As the aircraft tried to line up for a forced landing, it entered a steep low-altitude turn, stalled, and crashed before reaching a safe surface, killing both men on board. The lesson is a hard one in aviation. When something goes wrong close to the ground, saving airspeed and avoiding an aggressive turn can be more important than trying to reach the perfect landing spot. On June 9, 2020, near Maricopa, Arizona, this flight ended in disaster just moments before landing at Ogden Regional Airport. In the fading light after sunset, the pilot flew a low, non-startup approach over dark, unlit terrain, lost situational awareness, and struck a hill, even though investigators found no mechanical failure that would have prevented normal flight. The lesson is a powerful one. At night, especially over featureless terrain, a familiar approach can turn deadly if altitude awareness slips for even a few seconds. On March 18, 2020, near Ocala, Ogden, this takeoff unraveled in seconds when the airplane began veering left and ran out of room before the pilot could recover. NTSB investigators found no mechanical failure. Instead, the pilot's left shoe became stuck between the rudder pedals, which led to a loss of control and a collision with trees just off the runway. The lesson is a sharp one. During takeoff, even a small obstruction in the cockpit can turn into a major accident, which is why full, unobstructed controlled movement matters before every departure. On January 28, 2020, near Springfield, Illinois, a routine instrument approach turned into a fatal accident in poor weather. While attempting to follow the ILS into Abraham Lincoln Capital Airport, the pilot allowed the airplane to drift off course. The descent became unstable, and the aircraft crashed short of the runway, killing all 3 people on board. The lesson is a serious one. In instrument conditions, even a brief loss of situational awareness can be enough to turn an approach into a disaster. On December 31, 2019, in Olathe, Kansas, a departure from Johnson County Executive Airport turned deadly almost immediately after liftoff. Investigators found that the elevator trim had been left in a nose-up position instead of the proper takeoff setting, causing the airplane to pitch up too steeply, lose airspeed, stall, and crash, killing both people on board. The lesson is a critical one. Even before the wheels leave the runway, a missed-train setting can decide the outcome of the entire flight. On December 23, 2019, in Hanson, Massachusetts, a training flight at Crandland Airport nearly ran out of options when the instructor took control and tried to land in a field beyond the runway. The airplane touched down in soft terrain, the nose gears separated, and both people on board escaped injury, with investigators concluding that the accident was caused by the instructor's delayed remedial action. The lesson is a familiar but unforgiving one. In the traffic pattern, even a brief delay in taking corrective action can turn a manageable situation into an off-airport landing. On November 17, 2019, near Ogden, Utah, a routine departure turned into an accident just seconds after takeoff when the landing gear would not retract and the airplane began losing climb performance. Investigators found that the structure did not use the alternate system to rise the gear, and with the airplane no longer climbing as expected, it struck terrain during the initial climb. Both people on board were seriously injured. The lesson is a practical one. When a problem appears right after liftoff, knowing the backup procedure and acting on it immediately can make the difference between a close call and a crash. On October 31st, 2019, near Ocala, Florida, a post-maintenance test flight ended in disaster just minutes after takeoff when the pilot became disoriented, failed to follow ATC instructions, and lost control of the airplane before it crashed onto a highway. NTSB investigators found no mechanical failure that would have prevented normal flight and conclude that the loss of control was caused by an acute medical event and/or the pilot's use of impairing medication. The lesson is a sobering one. Even a technically airworthy airplane can become uncontrollable within moments if the pilot is not physically fit to fly. On October 20, 2019, near Angel Fire, New Mexico, a departure from high elevation airport turned fatal when the airplane was unable to maintain altitude after takeoff and descent out of control, killing both people on board. Investigators determined that high-density altitude and gusting winds severely reduced the aircraft's performance, and that the pilot's limited experience with high-altitude flying contributed to the decision to depart in those conditions. The lesson is clear. In the mountains, performance margins can disappear faster than they seem, and weather that looks manageable on the ground can become unforgiving the moment the wheels leave the runway. On September 7, 2019, near Carpenter, Wyoming, the takeoff looked routine at first, but within seconds the airplane rolled into a steep left bank, stalled at very low altitude, and crashed, killing the pilot. Investigators found no mechanical failure, and the NTSB concluded that the accident happened when the pilot exceeded the airplane's critical angle of attack during the initial climb. The lesson is a sharp one. Right after takeoff, even a small loss of airspeed in a turning climb can leave no room at all to recover. On September 6, 2019, near Hood River, Oregon, a takeoff turned fatal almost immediately after liftoff, when the engine lost power and the airplane rolled into a stall at very low altitude. Investigators determined that the fuel selector was not in the proper position, And with the aircraft already nose high and above its maximum takeoff weight, there was almost no room to recover once the power was gone. The lesson is a simple but unforgiving one. A missed cockpit check on the ground can become unrecoverable in the air within seconds. On August 27, 2019, in North Las Vegas, Nevada, what should have been a simple hover check turned into an accident within seconds. After maintenance on a helicopter that had already shown signs of engine trouble, the pilot handed the controls to a man he believed had more experience in that model. But investigators later found the passenger was not certificated and lost control almost immediately, sending the helicopter backward into a fuel card and onto its side. The lesson is a serious one. In aviation, especially during hover work, trust is never a substitute for verified qualifications, because at that high end speed, there is almost no time to recover. On August 20, 2019, near Half Moon Bay, California, a Beech 36 went down in the Pacific Ocean after the engine lost total power during a descending turn about 30,000 feet above the water. The pilot was unable to restore power and ditched offshore. And although investigators noted early signs of possible fuel-related trouble, including debris in the fuel samples and unstable fuel flow, the exact reason for the engine failure could not be determined because the wreckage was not recovered. The lesson is an important one. When an aircraft begins showing repeated fuel or engine irregularities, those warnings cannot be treated as minor, because once the power is gone, the time left to solve the problem may be almost nothing. On July 17, 2019, in Mesquite, Nevada, a ferry flight in a Cessna 550 ended in flames after the pilot landed at the wrong airport, touched down hard halfway down the runway, lost control, and slid off the side before the aircraft was destroyed by fire. Investigators conclude that the pilot was intoxicated, with a blood alcohol level far above the FAA limit, and that impairment played a central role in both the mistaken landing and the loss of control on rollout. The lesson is as direct as it gets. In aviation, judgment is part of flying, and once that is compromised, even a routine landing can turn into a serious accident.
All right, dispatch, North Air 11 on the airport. There's been a crash landing of a jet on the north end of the field.
On June 8, 2019, near Southold, New York. A routine departure turned into emergency when the engine lost power shortly after takeoff, forcing the pilot toward an open field. Investigators found that a shifted main bearing caused the power loss, and as the pilot maneuvered at low altitude, the airplane dropped below a safe glide path and crashed, killing both people on board. The report also noted that the aircraft had been flown despite known engine deficiencies. The lesson is a hard one. Known mechanical problems should never be carried into the air, because once the engine quits close to the ground, there may be almost no time left to recover. On March 18, 2019, near Yukon, Oklahoma, an approach to Sunday's airport turned catastrophic when the jet suddenly climbed, rolled left, went inverted, and crashed, killing both pilots. The NTSB concluded that the thrust reversal system was unairworthy. Left in that condition but inadequate maintenance led to an asymmetric in-flight deployment during the approach and a complete loss of control. The lesson is a stark one. Maintenance problems can stay hidden until the most critical phase of flight, and on approach, there may be no altitude left to recover from a system failure. On March 13, 2019, at Compton, California, a routine arrival ended in catastrophe when a North American T-28 landed on the same runway behind a Cessna 152 and struck it from behind, killing the student pilot and seriously injuring the instructor. Docket evidence showed a breakdown in traffic awareness during the approach. The T-28 pilot reported severe sun glare, said he never saw or heard the other airplane, and investigators found the radio was not set to Compton's traffic frequency. The lesson is a clear one. At non-towered airport, visual scanning and the correct frequency are not back up to each other. They are both essential defenses against collision.
You can't see him. Go around, rascal. You couldn't see him.
On December 17, 2018, near Aberdeen, Idaho, a takeoff ended in disaster less than half a minute after liftoff when the airplane lost power in the initial climb and dropped almost vertically into open terrain. Investigators found that the fuel sectors were improperly positioned toward the wingtip tanks, which were approved for level flight only, and that one magneto was in poor condition and partially inoperative. Together, those issues likely reduced engine power and diverted the pilot's attention until the aircraft stalled and spun at an altitude too low for recovery. The lesson is a decisive one. When trouble begins right after takeoff, there is almost no margin left, which is why correct fuel setup and basic maintenance discipline on the ground matter so much. On December 25, 2018, near Sioux Falls, South Dakota, a Beech 58 was descending on an instrument approach in poor weather. When the path began to wander, the airspeed bled away and the aircraft stalled before crashing into residential area, killing both people on board. NTSB investigators found no mechanical failure that would have prevented normal flight and conclude that the pilot failed to maintain adequate airspeed during the approach. The lesson is a familiar but unforgiving one. In cloud and low visibility, once an approach stops being stable, the priority has to be flying the airplane first, because the margin to recover can disappear almost instantly. On February 6, 2019, near Aurora, Oregon, a training flight ended just short of the runway during the practice power-off approach. As the pilot tried to tighten the turnback toward final, the airplane exceeded its critical angle of attack, stalled, and crashed. And investigators also found that the instructor failed to monitor the maneuver closely enough. The lesson is a familiar but unforgiving one in aviation. When an approach starts slipping away at low altitude, trying to force the airplane back into position can leave no margin to recover.